today fired me up. There were two guys that I had my eyes on during this combine, or during today. It was the linebackers, the edge rushers, and the defensive tackles that spoke. And I looked at it and said, I don't care about the linebackers. The Steelers are not going to add a linebacker this offseason. I do not care about the edge rushers. There's no chance the Steelers are adding an edge rusher this offseason. And then I looked at it and said, defensive tackle, that's the position that truthfully I love. I have my eyes on D tackle all the way in the opening round of the NFL draft. And I think Walter Nolan and Kenneth Graham are winning me over by the day here and really just taking over as my favorites. And the way they spoke today, the way Kenneth Graham convinced me that he is a 3-down defensive tackle, because there were questions about whether or not he could be a 3-down defensive tackle. The way Walter Nolan just made it known, like, I'm a dog, and I'm trying to convince teams that I could play every single position on the defensive line. Doesn't matter what the defense is. I could back up TJ Watt or start next to TJ Watt, but I could also be Cam Hayward or Keanu Benton in the middle if I need to. It doesn't matter. I'll play all of them. Doesn't matter. I think they're big. They look the part. That's the thing is, like, nothing against Darius Alexander, but I saw him today and I said, you're a lot smaller than I thought you were going to be. You are a lot smaller than the guy that I expected. Now, his hands are literally the size of this pillow. I'm not lying. And he probably is a monster. But Walter Nolan and Kenneth Graham just looked like guys that are going to come in here wherever they end up and make an impact. And they convinced me with their words, and they convinced me with their size. And tomorrow, I'm sure they're going to convince me with their actions on the field. Those two got me hyped. I'm all in on them. I'm all in. Like, I am. I'm sorry to say, I'm all in on defensive tackle. Just the more I speak down here, the more I talk to people, the more I talk to scouts, the more I talk to agents, the more I realize how good this defensive tackle line or this defensive tackle class is, and how superior they stand in that back half of the first round. I will say this as well. There's like a growing belief that Kenneth Grant has a better chance to get to 21 than Walter Nolan does. And I'd be very much so okay with that situation. I'd be about Walter Nolan too. I definitely would be. But there's a strong belief that that's going to change. And I think I'm okay with it. You watched Michigan, you watched Kenneth Grant. I don't know how much Ole Miss football you watched this season, but you definitely know about Walter Nolan. If there is the possibility Kenneth Grant's the guy, I mean, there's a part of me that I think got a little bit more excited in that instance and said, that works out pretty well for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think that's pretty okay. If it is happening, your thoughts on the matter?
Yeah, I mean, the Steelers would be in a great situation if they were able to get Kenneth Grant. I love Walter Nolan as well. I echo your sentiments, but I think Grant brings exactly what the Pittsburgh Steelers need in the middle of that defensive line. The guy is an absolute stud. He's a rock. He's a boulder. And I think both of them are going to put on a show tomorrow. That's what I'm excited about. And that's what, everybody wants to see at the NFL Combine. They want to see big dudes run fast. And that's what we get to see tomorrow. And I'm sure both of these guys are going to put on a show. The problem is, once they put on a show, you mentioned they said all the right things today. And I would assume they were going to say all the right things today. One's coming from an SEC school. One's coming from a Big Ten school. So media is nothing new to these guys. So I'm not surprised that they knew what to say at the NFL Combine. They've probably been rehearsing it since the Senior Bowl ended. But tomorrow's where the rubber meets the road. But the unfortunate part about that is also tomorrow is the day that a lot of these scouts are going to look at this, and a lot of these GMs are going to look at this and say, man, maybe we should move Kenneth Grant up our draft board. Maybe we should move Walter Nolan up our draft board. And of course, It also goes into whenever they meet with whoever they end up meeting with down in Indy. But this is if they get the option to choose, I think Kenneth Grant is probably the better pick right now. But to have the option in the first place is a good place to be for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great play. Like, you think about the 21st pick in the NFL draft, and what comes to mind? Nothing. Boatload of nothing. Boatload of you're getting the third best wide receiver and the sixth best defensive tackle and like the 11th best quarterback and maybe you could get an offensive lineman if Troy Fautanu falls to you. That's what you're thinking of. And in this draft class, like, you could get a building block on the defensive line that I think is masterful. You know, like, people will say, and I think Harmon out of Oregon also impressed me today. I want to add him to the list as well. And he said he models his game off of Cam Hayward. I love that. You know, I think everybody loves that. But I think any of these three guys, I don't think Harmon's got a shot to slide to Pittsburgh. I would be surprised if Harmon falls to Pittsburgh. But the other two, like, I don't know. I just think that in this draft class, if the Steelers were to look at it and say, we need a guy who's a guarantee, we need somebody who we know is going to be a future piece to this defense. This is not a, we need a position. This is not a, we need we need a linebacker. We're going to go get Devin Bush. We need a safety. We're going to draft Terrell Edmonds. We need a corner. We're going to go get Artie Burns. This is a, who's the best player available on the most important side of the football, which is defense. Okay, this is a TJ Watt. This is a Cam Hayward. That's how I kind of look at this. You could even toss Bud Dupree in there, because, to be honest with you, Bud Dupree was the best player available. He didn't work out that way, but he was the best player available in his draft. And I think Walter Nolan and Kenneth Grant could be that guy where it matches positional need and best player on the board. And if that's the case, like, that's what the Steelers need. I'm all for it. Again, the more I talk, the more I listen to people, the more I ask questions, the more I see these guys, the more I start to realize that defense still wins championships. And the best thing you can do for a team is build that defense, and if Ashton Genty's sitting there at 21, I mean, that's a no-brainer. If there's some crazy way somebody nuts falls to 21, there's a no-brainer. You change it up, you go offense. Excuse me. But if your options are Matthew Golden, Luther Burden, or one of these defensive tackles, it's also a no-brainer to go with one of these defensive tackles. And it seems that it's more likely that that scenario is going to play itself out. And I think that works so well in the Steelers' favor. Again, we'll see what happens. Like you said, tomorrow they're going to hit the field, they're going to impress, and you're going to get teams that are all over them. Oh, now we got to get Kenneth Grant. Oh, now we got to get Walter Nolan. And there's a chance that everybody's gone by 15. So let me ask that question, because I don't think Walker out of Kentucky is a guy that I want the Steelers to even sniff, to be honest with you. I think there are a lot of other defensive tackles that you could get a little bit later in the draft that I'd feel good about. But it's just like last year, where you were looking at Mims and Troy Fautanu and who was the dude out of Oregon that I will never be able to pronounce his name? God.
I mean, Oregon had Jackson Powers Johnson, but Oregon State had Talis Fuaga.
That guy.
Yeah.
And you had the conversation. You had to have the conversation of, do you move up, and when would you be comfortable with the Steelers moving up? I think that's kind of the situation here. So I'll ask the question: where do you move for one of these? You're not moving up for Emeka Egbuka. I think you'd move up for Ashton Genty, obviously. But again, the more I'm pretty convinced he's not going to make it out of top 5, let alone the top 12. When Dallas picks, where do you go for a defensive tackle? Would you go for a defensive tackle? Egbuka's off the board. We'll say Egbuka's off the board, because that makes a difference. But in this scenario, we'll say Egbuka's off the board. When are you moving up? Are you moving up for a defensive tackle?
No, I'm not moving up at all. I think the Steelers have too many needs to throw away any of their draft picks, even if it's a 7th round pick, which it's going to be more than a 7th to move up anything substantial in the NFL draft. I'm not moving up at all, simply because I want to keep all those picks in-house, because the Steelers need as many swings as humanly possible. They have a lot of holes to fill. They have the most expensive defense, which means I'm not opposed to taking a defender, but I am opposed to trading up for another defender, because you need to start backfilling that backside, because the defense is expensive, but it's also getting older. So I think you need more talented players on the defense. You have a young offense, but you need to get more talent into that room. I think the Steelers just have too many holes to be trading up in the NFL draft. And I also think that, listen, if both of these guys are off the board, there's still going to be a very good player there at 21. And because of the fact that the Steelers have so many needs, it feels like no matter who's off the board, they're going to have options at 21 to fill one of their holes.
I I agree with the premise. I agree with the premise. I think the options to fill one of their needs talent wise might be a little bit low at 21 if a lot of these guys start flying off the board. I still think it's like a star potential. And I agree with the argument that you've already invested too much in this defense and the Steelers can't dig themselves an even deeper hole and say, "Oh, well, we have the third highest paid safety, the second highest paid edge rusher. Cam Hayward's making $35 million. And, now we gave up a third round pick to go get a first round defensive tackle. And we're just going to hope it all works out in our favor. Like, we're just going to hope that just plays itself out. I agree with that. I don't think you dig deeper. Depending on who's there and what the draft capital is, though, some of these guys are definitely worth it. I'm not saying that you should, but they hold the value. Like if somebody's sitting there at 17 and the value is a fourth round pick, like they hold that value. I'm not saying it's the right move to do it. I'm just saying that the equation works out and I think Kenneth Grant, I think Walter Nolan, I think Harmon out of Oregon. I think all three of those guys are names that meet that scale where it goes, I'd move up this far to get this guy. And a number, because again, like, let me ask this. Is it, in my opinion, Walker out of Kentucky isn't going to work out. He gives me Dan McCullers vibes. Which, Dan was a great dude. Not the best football player. And he gives me Dan McCullers vibes. Darius Alexander's 25 years old. Would you rather give up a pick there? Or is it a worse move? Not would you rather. Is it a worse move to trade up to get a guy, or a worse move to take a guy where there's potential of a flop, like real potential of a flop? Obviously, everybody's got that risk, but some guys obviously hold more risk than others.
See, I think you're thinking too narrowly for the first round. I think you're focused in on that defensive line, especially because, I mean, they're the guys you talked about. But as we always talk about when it comes to these draft conversations, it's a matter of how does the draft shake out? Because if the draft is shaking out where, yeah, all these defensive linemen are flying off the board because they're as impressive as you're saying they are, but on the other side of things, Omarion Hampton's still available, maybe Ashton Jinty's still available, maybe Emeka Ibuka's still available, maybe Ben Morrison is still available. There could be options depending upon who goes up, because when somebody goes up, somebody else has to come down. So it all depends on how the trade board shakes out. But if you do lose out on those two guys, you're probably not spending a first round pick on some of these other names. The guy from Oregon, you're not spending a lot of your first round pick on a lot of these guys. You're simply moving to a different area of need, which fortunately for the Steelers, I guess, they have plenty of them.
That's true. I agree with that. I think it's interesting where it all shakes out. And over the next couple of days, it's all going to change. You know what I mean? This is the NFL Combine. Tomorrow, we'll talk to corners, and there'll be somebody that impresses me there. And then at some point during this week, I'm going to start hearing stuff that you're going, okay, change the entire train of thought here. Everything I thought I knew about the Steelers, I no longer know about the Steelers because this person told me that, or these 10 people told me that, or, whatever, however it shakes out. But that will, at some point, that will go down.